Episode 17, Clarksburg Killers. Hey y'all, I'm Heather, and this is Poisoned Appalachia, the dark side of Appalachia. As always, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode. I thought it was interesting and a nice break from the realities of the dark side of Appalachia. I may do a future episode on some more Cherokee legends. There are a lot of them out there. If that's something you all would be interested in. Also, if you listened to my first Wholesome Appalachia episode, I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed doing that one too. Grandma Gatewood was an amazing lady. But let's move on to this week's episode. I originally was just going to do it about one person, Harry Powers, the Lonely Hearts Killer. And then I found out that there was another killer from Clarksburg. So I'm going to do it about both of them. So we'll call this episode Clarksburg Killers. But let's start with Harry Powers. He was known as the Lonely Hearts Killer or the Bluebeard of Quiet Dell. There's a film about him called Night of the Hunter, starring Robert Mitchum, that was released in 1955. My friend Michelle actually shared an article with me about this guy. I'd never heard the story and was excited to read about him. This guy was bad, really bad, no remorse at all. I don't know how I'd never heard of him. So this is a story that's kind of interesting because these things happen today, but it's rare that it happened years ago the way it did. Today people meet on the internet all the time, and sometimes the results don't turn out very well. People end up murdered. This seems like something that just happens in the modern era, but that's exactly what Harry Powers did. He met women through singles ads, and some of them didn't have a happy ending, unfortunately. Harry Powers, who was born as Harm Drenthe in 1892 in Reta in the Netherlands. His family was a poor farmers. He was average in school and quiet, they said, but he loved to write in his journal. He was also had turned into a life of crime in the Netherlands, having attempted several robberies. In the early 1900s, rumblings of the war in Europe started. The Netherlands was a neutral country, but right in the middle of England, France, and Germany, so his parents decided to move the family to America for a better life. Because of Harry's, delinquencies, they moved him a year earlier, or he was still Harm at the time, I guess. So they thought maybe if Harm turned to the straight and narrow, that it would be better in America. So in 1910, they moved to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. He started working on a farm of the family's friends, and he was quickly accused of abusing the animals. He also didn't like to be told what to do, so he quit soon after starting. When the U.S. joined World War I, Harm was drafted in as an immigrant, being one of the first ones drafted. I guess back then, if you're an immigrant, they kind of got you first. I'm not really sure. But somewhere along the way, he dropped his Dutch name and officially made his name Harry Powers. In 1921, Harry was back from the war, and he fell in love with Rose Strickland, who was a married woman. When she tried to break off the romance, he burnt her and her husband's house down, and he was arrested and sent to prison. After he got out of prison, he spent the next few years traveling across the Midwest. He would be involved in robberies, get arrested, get out of it, and move on several times. Also, I guess that he had kind of taken up residence with a lady and called him his wife at the time, or called her his wife at the time. But I don't know if they were actually ever married, but they committed some of the crimes together for a while, and then he eventually left her. And he was sent to prison again. After he got out of prison, he spent the next few years traveling across the Midwest. He would be involved in robberies again, get arrested again, get out of it, and move on several times. In 1926, he moved to Moundsville, West Virginia. In 1927, he married Luella Strother, or Strother. I'm not sure which way it was pronounced. But this was her second marriage, I guess, from what I could tell, which I couldn't tell very much about her. They don't really go much into the women too much in these stories. But Luella was the owner of a farm and a grocery store, and I read that she lived with her sister, but I only saw that on one thing, so I'm not really sure about that either. But Harry met Luella after responding to her Lonely Hearts advertisement, which, if you don't know what that is, it's a personal advertisement, sometimes called a contact ad. It's a form of classified advertising in which a person seeks to find a person for friendship, romance, marriage, or sexual activity. Luella was the owner of a farm in Quietdale, West Virginia, and a grocery store in Clarksburg, West Virginia, which I guess Quietdale is just kind of outside Clarksburg, so it's just kind of like a little not a suburb, but just a little country town out there. Harry and Luella worked together at her grocery store for several years, growing food on the farm and selling it at the grocery store. But when the Depression hit, things got financially harder, so Harry got a job as a vacuum salesman and started traveling all over the Midwest. I guess he was a really good salesman and people trusted him, so he did pretty good at his job. Which they never should have trusted him, but who would know at the time? Harry had had such success with his Lonely Hearts ad with Luella that he decided to keep using them to find women. He, of course, used aliases for these. He'd used several aliases. His most often used was Cornelius Orvin Pearson. Fleecing the lonely in 1920 was big business. Once he realized how profitable it was, he jumped at the opportunity. And many women wrote in response to his advertisements. Excuse me. Postal records later indicated that replies to Power's advertisement poured in at a rate at 10 to 20 letters per day. But it's no wonder, as his ad read, wealthy widower worth $150,000 has income of $400 to $2,000 a month. I own a beautiful 10-room brick home, completely furnished with everything that would make a good woman happy. My wife would have her own car and plenty of spending money, would have nothing to do but enjoy herself. And he said he was a civil engineer. I mean, that sounds pretty tempting, so I can see why women would fall for that, especially during the Depression when life was hard and you didn't know if you're going to get the next meal, even. The thing was, he wasn't the slightest bit attractive, but I guess it must have been charming. He was always described as being small, pudgy, and pig eyed. Not sure what pig eyed is, but he definitely didn't look like someone who would fool so many people when you see his picture. But while he was traveling with his vacuum salesman's job, he convinced Luella that they needed a garage built on the Quietdale property. So she paid to have someone put it in. Harry wanted to have a basement to it and had the property uh, built to his specifications. I guess he was kind of pretty hands-on with that. He had all of his correspondence sent to a private P.O. box in Clarksburg. After he posted his ad, he got 10 to 20 replies a day. One woman who answered the ad was Asta Eicher of Park Ridge, Illinois. It's a suburb of Chicago. Asta was the mother of 3 children and a widow. She had come to the U.S. from Denmark in June 1907. Not that different than Harry's story. And when she came to the U.S., she met Henry Eicher, who was from Switzerland and also had come to the U.S. in 1907. They met and married in 1908. Henry was a silversmith who became so skilled at his craft that he and his wife built a successful life together in the Chicago suburb of Park Ridge. They had a small home where their 3 children were there, and then Henry's silver business was there too. However, Asta's life completely changed on August 12, 1923, when Henry died unexpectedly. After Henry's death, Asta went searching for companionship and turned to the newspapers, which many at the time had published the column titled The Once Over Lonely Hearts column by H.I. Phillips. At this time, Asta was 45 and an amateur artist and a professional silversmith, having taken over her husband's business when he died. Also, she rented rooms to gentlemen at her house to bring in extra money. But she was still about to lose her home, so she was desperate and looking for her chance to better her life. When she saw Cornelius's ad, she was intrigued. They started corresponding through the post and developed a relationship. In August 1931, Asta had been bragging to friends and family about the well-off civil engineer who intended to sweep the woman off her feet. Cornelius Pearson was a righteous man who could take care of her and her family for the rest of their lives. He spoke well, had a decent job, and was a perfect candidate for a recent widower. The two had recently met through a Lonely Hearts agency, American Friendship Society. Cornelius Pearson came to meet her at her home. He met her 3 kids, Greta, Harry, and Annabelle, before taking Asta on a trip to his home. They all seemed to like him and get along with him. Asta would leave with him, leaving the 3 children in care of a friend, Elizabeth Abernathy, while she was away. Elizabeth would eventually receive a letter stating Cornelius would be back soon to whisk away the kids to live with their new family. Cornelius did show up and took the kids. Before leaving town, he sent the oldest daughter into the local bank to withdraw the last of Asta's funds from her savings account. But the bank declined because they thought it was weird that the oldest daughter would be doing this and not Asta. Before he could be questioned, Cornelius had vanished with the entire Eicher family, leaving all of their belongings behind. They were going to start anew at his house. This is the last that anyone saw of the family, however. Elizabeth did receive a letter that they were all going to travel abroad and would be back in several months. Weeks after the family disappeared, Powers was sighted at the Eichers' property at Park Ridge by Charles O'Boyle, who rented from Eicher for 2 years. He'd returned from a business trip to find the family gone. He called the police, who briefly detained Powers, who had been spotted on the property by a neighbor. Then they released him. He fled, but left behind a cache of letters from Eicher addressed to Cornelius Pearson at a post office box in Clarksburg, West Virginia. Not very smart on his part there. But about the same time, Cornelius Pearson was starting a relationship with Dorothy Lemke of Northborough, Massachusetts. She was divorced and a nurse. She had also met Cornelius through the personal ads. They met after some time, and he told her he lived in Iowa. He brought her to Iowa to marry her and persuaded her to withdraw $4,000 from her bank account. Lemke did not notice that instead of sending her trunks to Iowa, where Powers claimed to be living, he sent them to the address of Cornelius O. Pearson in Fairmont, West Virginia. So when they got to Iowa, he convinces Dorothy that they need to go to West Virginia for some reason. I wish I could find more about his victims, but everything seems to focus on him. For some reason, Dorothy was the one that they did the case on when they found the bodies. They had the most evidence on her. So, which I'll go into that in just a few minutes. Once Dorothy came up missing, and the police looked into both cases and found out that Cornelius Pearson was involved in both, Powers was careful about a lot of things, but he created a P.O. box for Cornelius right there in Clarksburg. They tracked the letters there, but there was not evidence that a Cornelius Pearson lived in the area. But through a bit of detective work, they found that Cornelius Pearson's P.O. box was signed out by none other than Harry Powers. So, see, not very smart. Also, one other woman Cornelius had proposed marriage to was Bessie Storrs. She was supposed to marry him the day he was arrested. Luckily, she got through unscathed as far as I could see. They investigated the Powers, and Llewellyn knew nothing about any of this. And of course, Harry said she didn't either, because obviously she didn't. They investigated the shop and found nothing, but word gets out pretty quickly in small towns. The police received an anonymous call about a smell of decomposition on the farm they owned. The police went out there and found the garage. It was locked, but they got in. Police broke into the garage and quickly discovered something sinister. A pile of clothing of different sizes, multiple blood stains, hair, jewelry, and a trapdoor. They found that the stairs leading down to the basement. In the basement, it looked like 4 jail cells had been built. In the shadowy damp within the underground chamber, they found the small bloody footprint of a child, a burned bank book, and blood-soaked hair and clothing. Police decided to wait for Powers to show up and hear his explanation for the scene. Once he was spotted, he was quickly apprehended and led through the scene. Police would go on to discover dozens of letters all ready to be sent out to potential victims of Mr. Powers. A crowd had gathered around the farm by this point, and the police couldn't find any bodies. But a young boy who had helped build a drainage ditch there contacted the police. He suggested moving the search to the drainage ditch that was accessible from the Powers garage. Upon doing so, investigators immediately noticed the unmistakable odor of decay and knew instantly what Powers had done with the innocent family. Prisoners from the local penitentiary were brought in to excavate the area, and the bodies of Asta, Greta, Harry, and Annabelle were all unearthed. They were all bound tightly with rope within burlap sacks. All of the female members of the Eichers were hung from a noose while Harry was bludgeoned with a hammer. A few days later, Dorothy Lemke would also be discovered in a similar state, with a belt tied around her neck. Now, I've also read other things happen to the family. Like one of the things said that he had gassed them, but most of the things said that he had hung them, so I'm not really sure. And I guess it doesn't really matter how they died, but it was very clear that they had been murdered. Love letters are found in the trunk of Powers' automobile. He had written back to many women with the intention of stealing their money and killing them, just as with most of his recent victims. No one really knows if he any more victims. Or even if he didn't, he most certainly would have not been caught if he hadn't got these. So it's really hard to tell if he did have any more victims. Also, side note here, although not charged, Powers was suspected of involvement in the 1928 disappearance of Dudley Wade. Wade was a carpet sweeper salesman with whom he had once worked with. His inventory of vacuums were found with Harry, but he was able to finesse the situation by claiming Dudley had stolen the merchandise and he had simply intended on bringing them back to his rightful owner. He was never fully investigated. And then I guess there was an unsolved murder of a Jane Doe in Morris, Illinois, and they thought he might be connected with that one, but they didn't really have enough evidence. But the police arrested Powers and took him back to the police station. They questioned him for well over 12 hours, and he never confessed to anything. But then he fell down the stairs and ended up with significant bruising, 2 black eyes, and bruising on his chest and arms. After that, he confessed. Powers would regale authorities with how he was able to kill an entire family. I was permitting little Harry Eicher to watch the killings of his mother and others, but in the middle of it, he let out an awful scream. I was afraid the neighbors would hear it, so I picked a hammer and let him have it. He went on to state that Dorothy arrived a day later after the killing of the family. Powers would torture Dorothy for hours before she agreed to sign some checks. Powers would go on to blindfold the woman, strangle her as well. And also I read that they were hung, so I don't know if he strangled them actually by hand or just if they're just saying that they were hung. I'm not quite sure. Later, he recanted his confession, stating that he was coerced into it, which I'm sure he was, since he fell down the stairs. But that doesn't make it any less true. After his questioning, when he was in jail that first day, an angry mob of thousands of people formed around the jail, wanting to lynch Harry Powers then and there. The police couldn't get them to leave, and they finally dispersed them with tear gas and fire hoses. Which, I mean, what's the point? I kind of think they should have just let him take him, but but I guess everybody deserves due process. He was moved to the state penitentiary in Moundsville, West Virginia. After the arrest, the story became national news, and many women would come forward claiming how close they'd come to being Harry Powers' next potential victim. But all of that, you have to take with a grain of salt because, of course, a lot of people want attention for things like that. So it's really hard to tell. But media from across the country traveled to Clarksburg for the trial. Due to the growing interest in the case and due to recent construction on the courthouse, it was decided the case would be made even more of a spectacle and be held at the Clarksburg Opera House. The trial began on December 7th and lasted 5 days. Doctors would testify that Powers was a psychopath but knew the difference between right and wrong. After both sides wrapped up their arguments, the jury would deliberate under the stage for just 2 hours before returning with an unsurprising guilty verdict. On December 12, 1931, Powers was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. His sentence was carried out at the state penitentiary on March 18, 1932. So in this case, it kind of was an eye for an eye thing because he supposedly had hung everybody else too. So maybe, you reap what you sow there. But according to a newspaper in Camden, New Jersey, the public thirst for blood had reached theatrical proportions. Milnesville had taken on a holiday festival appearance in preparation for the execution of a man whose crime startled the world. Outside the prison, crowds gathered along the curbs. Automobiles were lined up for blocks. During his incarceration, rumors and speculation ran wild on who else Harry could be guilty of killing. How many widows could he have killed? Some speculate Harry could have killed as many as 50 people due to a comment he made to reporters. When trying to get him on further charges, Harry mentioned that he is already good for 5. Why not get him on 50? But, who knows if there's any truth to that because it's just, people bragging. So, but I definitely say there were more than 5 murders, but probably not 50. But this was during the Great Depression, and people would just leave towns and go for a better life. So people may not even have known they were missing. So it's really hard to tell how many people Harry got away with killing. The senseless murders have inspired a number of documentary and fictional works. Perhaps the best well-known is the movie The Night of the Hunter, based on this book of the same name by West Virginia author Davis Grubb. A noted writer, Grubb wrote 10 novels and a host of short stories, some of which were adapted for television by Alfred Hitchcock and Rod Serling. Grubb was born in Clarksburg, but grew up in Mountainville. He knew the Power story and used it as a loose basis for the characters in The Night of the Hunter. Seems like people have always been bad, and there's always been murders and thieves out there waiting for their chance. But it's sad that it has to happen at all. You know, just a sad situation. Have you ever heard of Harry Powers? Did you know his story? Has anyone seen the movie The Night of the Hunter? I asked my mom and she hadn't seen it, so which is weird because she was a pretty big movie buff. But maybe that wasn't a very popular movie. I don't really know. But oddly enough, Harry Powers is not the only serial killer associated with Clarksburg, West Virginia. Rita Mays is also synonymous with murder in Clarksburg, albeit a different way. And this one's pretty modern. Really modern, really. Rita Mays was born in Reynoldsville, West Virginia in 1975. She was a United States Army West Virginia National Guard veteran who served from November 2000 to April 2001, and again from February 2003 to May 2004. When she deployed to Iraq and Kuwait with the 1092nd Engineer Battalion, she, prior to beginning her employment as a nursing assistant with the Lewis A. Johnson Veterans Medical Center, Mays had worked in corrections at the West Virginia State Department of Corrections at North Central Regional Jail in Greenwood, West Virginia. That was between 2005 and 2012. In 2013, Mays was one of several defendants in a lawsuit that was brought in by an inmate incarcerated at the jail who alleged that he had reportedly been beaten by Mays and the other correction officers. In June of 2015, Mays began working as a nursing assistant at the Lewis A. Johnson Veterans Medical Center in Clarksburg, West Virginia, with no certification or license to care for patients. Nursing assistants at the VAMC are not qualified or authorized to administer any medication to patients, including insulin. And medication was supposed to have been locked in a medication room where only nurses could get to it. Mays was assigned to work overnight shifts on Ward 3A at the hospital's medical surgical unit in July 2017. She was not certified as an aide, as I said, but she was a good aide, they said. She had actually won the Nurse Aide of the Year award the prior year. And several of the people said that she was, just a really good aide and really, really good to work with. So, which I guess she wasn't. But elderly patients began suffering mysterious acute drops in their blood sugar level. The victims were all elderly males with multiple health conditions, but they were all meant to be discharged. They weren't terminal patients, so they were all planning on being discharged. Their blood sugars plummeted to dangerous levels. Over the course of 11 months, hospital staff eventually attributed the deaths of several patients on the ward to hypoglycemia. Many of the deaths were individuals who were not insulin dependent. 4 of the deaths occurred within 16 days. The hospital began an internal investigation of 11 deaths. At first, nothing really seemed too suspicious. At first, no one really noticed much until the death of Russell Posey, 92, who was admitted in June 2018. Posey had been successfully treated for pneumonia and moved to Ward 3A to recuperate in anticipation of a discharge. But in the middle of the night, after a Father's Day gathering with family in his hospital room, the World War II Navy veteran had a sudden hypoglycemic event, causing his blood sugar to plummet to 14. He was a non-diabetic and no prior problems with sugar. After pumping 3 bags of life-saving dextrose into his system, Posey regained consciousness, but he was never the same after that. He didn't recognize people, and he died 2 weeks later. The case caught the attention of the hospital administrators, who conducted an official review of the hospital procedures. A shocking pattern emerged. Many patients had unexplained hypoglycemia, with 6 incidents just in that year. Looking back through the records, it began in July 2017, and investigators traced the location of Ward 3A. The first victim, retired Navy officer Robert Edge Sr., was admitted for a urinary tract infection and died within 24 hours due to a sudden hypoglycemic event. He was the only diabetic of all the victims. In January 2018, Korean War vet Robert Kozel, 89, was admitted overnight and also died of similar causes. 2 months later, in March, Archie Edgell, 84, another Korean War vet, was admitted for dementia and died right before discharge due to an extreme hypoglycemic event. An autopsy later found that Edgell had been injected 4 times. The same month, George Shaw Jr., 81, a retired Air Force officer, went to the VA for mild symptoms of dizziness, but his blood sugar soon crashed. Shaw's family members suspected a drug mix-up, but at the time the incident was not referred up the chain of command. Lisa Ryan, an investigative reporter with the Washington Post, weighed in on the puzzling silence. There were members of the hospital staff who became very alarmed, but VA hospitals generally have a culture that makes it very hard for people to come forward. An additional 2 deaths occurred in April 2018. A 96-year-old vet identified by his initials, WAH, and 82-year-old Felix McDermott, a former paratrooper in the 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions. McDermott was admitted for pneumonia, and a call suddenly came in that his sugar had bottomed out, said his daughter Melanie, who noted he had never had problems with the sugar before. The choice was made to let him pass. 2 months later, Raymond Goldman became the 7th victim. Mays was fired from the hospital in June 18, and the investigation was turned over to the Inspector General of the United States Department of Veteran Affairs and the FBI. When the FBI was contacted by the VA hospital about the suspicious deaths, they searched through time cards and work records when the deaths happened and narrowed it down to 4 individuals that were there on each of those dates. We quickly learned that the nursing assistant, Rena Mays, was a 3A employee who was working when all the hypoglycemic events occurred, recalled Colin Davis, the OIG resident agent in charge. One of Mays' tasks was checking blood sugar levels for diabetic patients, and the sitter log showed that she was sitting one-on-one with many of the victims just before their deaths. Nursing staff used glucometers to check blood sugar levels, and the glucometer logs also held key information. Rita Mays took a disproportionate amount of the severely low blood sugar readings as opposed to other staff. The FBI questioned her, and she denied doing anything wrong, stating she didn't have access to the medication room. They asked her if she would take a polygraph test, but she declined, saying that she was in constant pain from her knee, and she knew that she would fail due to that. So at the time of the murders, Rita was in her late 40s and married with 2 sons, and her personal life had taken a wrong turn. We learned that her husband, Gordon Mays, was actually currently serving a 6-year sentence stemming from conviction for child pornography, said Vereb. She would call her husband after her shift, often complaining about the patients. Because he was in prison, they had access to all those phone calls. At first, Mays cooperated with the investigation and even agreed to a 5-hour interview with the FBI. When they started really pressing her, though, she realized she needed a lawyer. The FBI agents decided the only way to move forward was to exhume the remains of the victims for a forensic autopsy. The victims' families unanimously agreed. Insulin injection sites were discovered on all of the bodies, and 7 of the 8 victims were classified as homicides. Because Russell Posey had lived 2 weeks after his hypoglycemic event, the medical examiner couldn't determine that an insulin injection caused his death. But it caused the events leading up to his death, but of course they couldn't prove that. Faced with all the damning evidence, Rita surrendered. She ended up pleading guilty to 7 counts of second-degree murder and 1 additional count of attempted murder for Posey's death. And they found her guilty, but because she had, made a plea, they didn't. They're not going to execute her. I forgot what I was saying there. I'm sorry. But she will spend the rest of her life behind bars, 7 life terms, plus an additional 20 years for the attempted murder. The victims' families later sued the VA for negligence and collectively won a judgment for over $5 million, which to me doesn't really seem like a lot of money, but I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Part of the plea agreement required that Mays provide a debrief, which she would hopefully provide insight to the motive. According to prosecutor Jared Douglas, her reasoning was contradictory. First claiming that they were mercy killings, and then blaming her chaotic home life, saying killing gave her a sense of control. So still no one really knows why she did it. Like I said, the patients weren't terminal, and they had planned to them all being discharged. So it definitely wasn't a mercy killing. And even that's what she was claiming to do. It wasn't mercy. Luckily, she'll never be released from prison and never will have a chance to hurt anyone again. So, two serial killers in a small town. Kind of odd, huh? Just a coincidence, really. I don't think that Clarksburg has any magic properties for creating serial killers. Actually, Clarksburg, West Virginia is a nice city. I've been to it a couple times. It's the county seat of Harrison County, West Virginia, and in the north central region of the state. The population of the city was 16,039 in the 2020 census, making it the 10th most populous city in West Virginia. It's not a very big town, though. West Virginia just doesn't have a lot of big towns. Clarksburg has a lot of historical buildings you can visit. I was checking out their website, and there's a ton of them. And it looks like they have some outdoor activities too, but really, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of things to do in Clarksburg that I could find online. But like I said, I've been there, and it's a nice little city. And it's only about a half an hour away from the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. It's about 45 minutes from Morgantown, and it's even pretty close to Grafton, where the Flatwoods Monster is. So there's a lot of stuff to do around. This is the last episode in November, so happy Thanksgiving to everyone who celebrates it. I was going to try to find some holiday-themed episode, but not sure how many of those I can find on the creepy side of things. I couldn't find anything for Thanksgiving, definitely. But I do have at least one in mind for the Christmas season. Maybe some more if I can find anything. Either way, it'll still be on the scary and dark side of things. And then next month we'll have a positive episode too, but mainly the spooky ones. As always, thank you for listening. You guys are all awesome. I appreciate each and every one of you. And I'm thankful for you all. That's my little Thanksgiving thing. I'm definitely thankful for you all. You can look me up on social media under Poison Appalachia. I just joined Blue Sky, so if you're on there, look me up. I'm on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Threads, and of course Facebook. And you can contact me on any of those. But as always, Facebook's probably your best bet. And you can email me at poisonappalachia@gmail.com. And I just put together a website, which I'm still working on. So you can check it out at poisonappalachia.com. So lots of big stuff going on here. And I'm starting up a little merchandise store through Zazzle, so you can check it out there too. I put it on the website and on Facebook. And as always, hit me up with any comments, questions, or show ideas. Talk to you all next week. Have a great Thanksgiving. Bye, y'all.